Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
There was a warning today that the delayed Brexit talks can't start soon enough because of an NHS recruitment crisis. Recent figures show that only 46 EU nurses and midwives registered in the UK in April this year, compared to 1,304 in July last year. That's a fall of 96%, and unions say the government urgently needs to provide long-term security for foreign workers. Richard Perlow reports on the concerns of staff and management at a hospital in Nottinghamshire.
For 15 years, Marika has made Nottingham and the NHS her home, travelling everywhere by bike, one of the few nods these days to her Dutch heritage. But since the Brexit referendum, the number of EU nurses wanting to join her in the UK has reduced dramatically, with concerns over future employment rights affecting those already here too.
The European members of staff are everywhere, and without all those different people within Nottingham, I think that the trust would really struggle if anything were to happen and we all had to leave.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Nationally, 1 in 9 nursing posts are vacant, and the 96% drop in those registering has led the Royal College of Nurses to warn patients could be put at risk. At this trust, where staff retention is far better than the average, 5% of their workforce comes from the EU.
The potential is that our EU nurses are anxious and don't know what's going to happen. They may not want to come and work with us. We're equally anxious that the ones that are here with us may want to leave.
It's a headache that no pills will solve.
I take some blood from you. I need to send a sample to the lab. Is all right?
Yes.
With recruitment also affected by the recent introduction of English language testing for EU nationals.
A few patients prefer to be treated by a British nurse, but most of my patients prefer to be treated by a nurse. For Portugal, Italy, doesn't matter. We give a good care. We look after them with our heart.
The Department of Health said this evening that EU nurses play a valued role in the NHS and that they would be a priority in Brexit negotiations. Nurses from Nottingham to the Netherlands will be wondering. Richard Perlow, ITV News.
Now, is this another consequence of Brexit? A collapse in the number of nurses from EU countries registering to work here, down from 1,300 last July to just 46 this April. There is already a serious shortage of nursing staff, particularly in England's NHS, and today there are warnings this could become even worse. Our health and social care correspondent Victoria MacDonald is at the Department of Health. Victoria.
Yes, well, Jeremy Hunt has only been in the job for just over 24 hours, reappointed again as Health Secretary, and already this is on his desk. A 96% reduction in the number of EU nurses registering to work here in the UK. One person today described it as the numbers as falling off a cliff. Now, does this have anything to do with Brexit? That has to be the suspicion. Although the Department of Health this afternoon was very keen to say to me that the language testing has been made harder over the past year, so that must have had some impact too. But look at some other figures that weren't released today. They were released earlier, and it shows the number of EU nurses already registered to work here leaving. They've gone up, those numbers have gone up by a third in the past year.
Well, what will the impact on the NHS be, Victoria? I mean, can't we just recruit from within our own shores?
That is the ideal, John, but there is a 30 to 40,000 shortfall of nurses already. And while there are 52,000 nurses in training places, they will take a while to come through. There are also recruitment and retention problems. There is a morale problem in the nursing profession. And we saw this during the election campaign when Theresa May was asked by a nurse why her pay had fallen, why she was only going to get a 1% pay increase over the next year. Theresa May said there is no magic money tree, a response that did not go down at all well. Now, this week, Jeremy Hunt will go to the NHS Confederation, where there will be the great and the good. Many of them will be gathered to discuss the issues surrounding the NHS. And one of the big questions that they will be wanting to ask him is, what are we going to do about Brexit? How are we going to retain the European Union people already here? And how are we going to keep recruiting?
Well, with me now is the Conservative MP, Dr. Sarah Wollaston, who was chair of the Commons Health Select Committee. I'm not sure whether you'll be next time, but I imagine you will be. But thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Victoria spelt out that it's both the question of recruitment generally and possibly Brexit.
It's very worrying. Undoubtedly, as we heard mentioned, there is the impact of language testing, but I think it's also the issue of pay, public sector pay, and the exchange rate. So I think there's a very complex series of problems. I think it was very welcome in the manifesto. There was an explicit recognition that all 140,000 health and care staff would be able to stay. That was very welcome. But I say that doesn't address the problem of the collapse in the number of people coming to work here, and this needs to be a #1 issue for the Department of Health.
But you see, one wonders whether Theresa May quite sees it like that. I mean, in one of those television debates, she was confronted by a nurse who said, look, my pay is the same as it was in 2009. In other words, when you get a 1% pay rise, you're actually getting a 2% pay cut because of inflation and all the rest of it. And one wonders really whether she has much sympathy for the needs to really pump money into the NHS to pay people decently.
Well, certainly tonight during the meeting of the 1922 committee, the issue of the way that the impact of the public sector on this election, that was discussed. It came over quite strongly, and I think that we will have to have a reappraisal of that position. And certainly I think that we cannot ignore the impact of pay and the exchange rate on recruitment. But as I say, there's also language testing and the impact of the perception of Brexit. So I say it's quite a complex series of problems, but it has to be #1 issue on the Department of Health desk.
Were you satisfied with her apology today?
I thought there was clear recognition and understanding and responsibility. It was essential for her to come to that meeting and take responsibility. She did that unequivocally tonight. And I think that what we now need to do is move forward. The sense from the meeting in the room was that people were behind the Prime Minister. Nobody in the country wants another general election. There's a clear recognition that it's in the national interest to move forward together.
In the immortal words of Mrs. Thatcher, she could go on and on.
Well, as I say, it wasn't a sense in which it was going on and on. It was a sense of the party coming together around her, because we all recognise that there's one of two ways we could go. We could either sort of collapse into sort of squabbling and infighting, which does nothing for anybody. I think what the country wants to see now is politicians, not just within parties, but across parties, working together, because that's what the arithmetic dictates. Absolutely,
Thank you very much
see
indeed.
that.
Thank you, Sarah Wollaston, indeed.